I'm particularly excited to be here today. Today is my own firm's 30th anniversary. This year we're going to do, it's kind of fun. This year we'll do 30 million, and I'm in a room talking to a bunch of 30-somethings that are going to shape the future, not only of tech, but of the world. I loved the intro that Vinod gave that's going to give you guys the strength to pull all of that off. So my firm lives at this crazy intersection between business and storytelling and has done so for 30 years for amazing brands. We've put the words in the mouths of some of the most powerful people on the planet. So I've personally seen the power of storytelling. I took a 10-year journey through story to understand its power and why it is that it is so amazing. And that's because storytelling moves people. The structure of a story is that there's this really likable person, you, who encounters these roadblocks, the crazy, messy middle, and emerges changed. Being able to tell stories in a way that transforms others is really powerful. Well, now that we can hook fMRI machines up to the brain, we can tell what's really going on. While a story is being told, all the sensing parts of your brain are firing. People feel when a story is being told. Also, your brain aligns. The storyteller and the story listener, your brains are firing in the exact same order at the exact same time, only when a story is being told. The other thing is it transports you. They say that the analytical parts of the brain that causes doubt and conflict and make them not believe you, those parts of the brain are suspended. They can transport and believe sometimes in the impossible when a story is being told. And the other thing that happened is when a group of people were told a story about a small child, before they were asked to give money, the ones that heard the story gave massively more generous to the ones who did not hear the story before they were asked to donate money. Stories will motivate you. They also have a structure that's actually kind of an analytical structure if you think about it, just all the way back to Aristotle, has a beginning, a middle, and an end. But yet when you apply that to your presentations, so often we don't even do this simple 3-act structure of having a very clear beginning, middle, and end. And you'll notice in between the beginning and the middle, there's a turning point, and between the middle and the end, there's another turning point. Your talks need to have turning points to them too, and I'll talk about that in a second. It was when I came across this shape, which is Freytag's dramatic arc. He was a dramatist in Germany. He drew the shape in 1863. He said that stories had a 5-act structure, which was an exposition, a rising action, a falling action, and a denouement. I loved it, because this demonstrates the rise and the fall. There's like a breathing in and a breathing out. There's this rising conflict, and then the tension is released. And I thought, wow, there's something really beautiful about that. And then when the folks at Cornell's Computational Story Lab put all 1,600 of Google's Gutenberg project stories into their database, that confirmed that this arc is real, this kind of rise and fall and rise and fall. And I thought, you know, the greatest speeches that I've ever heard have a sense of a rise and a fall to them. It's a cadence and a rhythm, and it draws you in and it releases you, draws you in and releases. And after going through a massive journey through storytelling, including Joseph Campbell, like really studied storytelling, I thought, how do you use this tool to move others? How do you use it to accomplish great things? What do we need to do to infuse storytelling in all of our speeches? So I made this discovery. I actually got a book called The 100 Greatest Speeches of All Time, went through this journey through storytelling, and I just studied the patterns in the spoken word. When I overlaid storytelling over the greatest speeches, a shape emerged. It's not an arc. This would be equal to a story arc, but this is a presentation arc. You could call it that. It has a beginning, a middle, and an end, and it's the structure of a great talk. So the beginning should establish what is. Here's our shared reality. Here's our values. Here's what's going on. Here's the State of the Union, but this is what could be. And that gap between what is and what could be is like the inciting incident in a story. You're asking them to leave their current realities and join you on this journey into a better future. And the middle goes back and forth between what is, what could be, what is, what could be. And the human brain can see and understand contrast. We can see contrast and understand it. This way, if you establish, here's our current reality, but look, we could be here, suddenly what currently is isn't appealing, and what could be is very alluring because they can see it. This last vertical line is your call to action. This is where you make the big ask for resources, for help, you want them to help you strategize, whatever's the ask that you need. And then you end with the new bliss. This should be some sort of poetic or beautiful way of you describing the way the future is going to look if your idea is adopted. So once I had this shape, if you've seen my TED Talk, I go into Steve Jobs and Dr. King pretty deep. But once I had this shape, I could analyze all kinds of presenters. I went back to my 100 Greatest Speeches books. There's no business people in these books, and I'm hoping someone in this room one day will be published in the greatest speeches of all time. So I'm just going to go through a bunch of them. Margaret Thatcher, Iron Lady speech. You can see it moves back and forth very rapidly. She was kind of a 1-2 punch gal, which you can kind of tell here. But this is the shape over time of her speech. Nehru told the most beautiful speech. It's as beautiful as the Dr. Martin Luther King's I Have a Dream speech. It's called A Tryst with Destiny. He delivered this at midnight, the night before India was freed from British rule. His follows the cadence almost in perfect rhythm. And at the end of this, he gave the most beautiful salutation to his motherland. It would just make you cry. It was so beautiful. Evita Perón, in the late 40s, she was known as published in all the magazines, most powerful woman in the Western Hemisphere. She was the wife of the president of Argentina. She gave a 10-minute talk, 10.5-minute talk in the plaza in Argentina. And this was interesting. 2 million people came out. It's one of the largest gatherings in human history to come and hear someone present. She talked for 10 minutes. She was done. At the end of 10 minutes, they were chanting for her to run for the vice president. The whole audience, Evita con Perón. She was such a compelling communicator. They wanted more from her. They wanted to hear more from her. Even the French, Charles de Gaulle, used the form on the radio from England while he was giving his great speech. Here, if you're like, well, I do technology. This is Richard Feynman. He was a physics professor at Caltech. People would leave their class, even if they didn't have to take physics, and come and hear him present. He was amazing, compelling. So what do you think the shape of a talk about the law of gravity looks like? Super rapid, back and forth. Here's physics applied, here's physics applied. He even predicted subatomic particles that would be machines in 1960. So he had a way of making science look very alluring. And then Steve Jobs. He did a 90-minute iPhone speech. You could see he has a very heightened sense of what could be all through his talk. And then, of course, Dr. King. He gave a 16-minute speech on the mall in DC, and this is the shape of his 16-minute talk. So you can see about 2/3 of the way through, it got really rapid there. And this is where he starts to contrast what is, what could be at the phrase level. I have a dream that one day, I have a dream that one day, really rapid. He didn't name this speech the I Have a Dream speech, the people did. He called it The Fierce Urgency of Now. That was the actual title. Because this rapid movement between what is and what could be, the people named it the I Have a Dream speech because of the phrases he used. And then here's Jesus, Sermon on the Mount. This was the most rapid one that I analyzed. Blessed are they, for they shall. Blessed are they who, for they shall. If you were to take this and read it at the speed of an audiobook, it's an 18-minute talk. So this might be like the first TED Talk ever done, super rapid. So now I'm going to take it from these like lofty people down to earth where we play. So I want to show you, in contrast, really dramatic contrast, a letter that my little niece wrote to her dad. So if you think about the impassioned plea of an 11-year-old little girl who's not read my books, never talked to her about how to communicate, she naturally communicated in a way when she wrote a letter because she wanted a mouse. This is the most important thing in this little 11-year-old girl's life. So she says, "Dear Dad, we want a mouse. And you might say they're stinky, but they are not if you put special drops in their water." That's marketing. The drops in the water don't work, just so you know. You might also say they're mean, but we rarely find an aggressive mouse. If they do bite, it is usually just a curiosity nibble. I know you won't want to pay for it, but Sophie and I have that covered. We've saved all our birthday money, so we can pay for the mouse and everything else, and you not have to pay a single cent. And the mouse will be in Sophie's or my room, so you won't even have to see it all the time. And the new bliss, was we will respect any decision that you make. And they got the frickin' mouse. What's interesting about this is her natural nature was to create a series of contrasts because she needed to make an impassioned plea. And she naturally did it. And I think we naturally create this cadence and this contrast when we desperately really want something, yet it was done so beautifully. So is a pitch the same thing? I'm talking about big, dramatic moments in human history. So how do you use this same tool for your pitch? Well, right now, if you're talking at like TED or you're doing CES and you're giving a great big speech, you have to establish a narrative that brings people along. When you're doing a pitch, you actually you horizontally flip the form, and you state the new bliss. You would state, here's how humans are gonna flourish because of my technology, and you get it out there. Now what happens is when you state this, these people are smart, and they see almost everything. Like immediately, like, oh my God, I see almost everything. And then you say your call to action, and here's what I need from you to make it happen. And then what you're gonna do is you're gonna start to create that contrast right away. Here's what is, here's what could be, here's what is, what could be, and you do it as long as you can until they cut you off, because they're gonna cut you off, they're gonna interrupt you, and then they're gonna take the conversation any way they want. That's how it goes, right? So you have to be prepared for that. So here's how it kind of works. There's different kinds of communication that you're gonna do. Let me get some liquids in me here. And here's how it rolls. If you have a small audience and it's spontaneous, high probability, it's a conversation. It was spontaneous. If you have a spontaneous conversation to a really large audience, you probably did something really stupid and someone caught it on YouTube and put it up there, like yelling at someone in the back seat when you're the CEO of Uber. That stuff, spontaneous, large audience, spreads like crazy. Don't do that. So then you have prepared large audience, which is a formal presentation, which would be talking at TED, doing an earnings call, your vision talks, your all hands meetings, all those need to be prepared very carefully. And then you have what we call a designed conversation, one that you're anticipating every question, you're anticipating all of the answers. You have to be part formal, part designed conversation, and that's where your pitch falls. You have to have anticipated every single question so that when they start doing those loop-de-loos, you have all the answers. So what happens is when you go in for a pitch, there's two forms of media that you'll be using in the process. For the formal presentation, you would use slides, and for the more small audience prepared conversation, you would use what's called a slide doc. So a slide doc, if in business we have these dense documents, technical documentation, that's on one extreme. The other extreme is a presentation that would be more cinematic in nature, more conceptual and beautiful in nature. And sandwiched in between those is this thing called a slide doc. This is a dense document, usually made in presentation software. For the older ones of us in the room, we used to call that collateral, and we used to print it. Now most of our marketing materials and pitch materials are made in slide software. So this is the spectrum. And what's going to happen is you can put dense information into a presentation. So this is a slide doc. You can see it looks more like a magazine. You just increase the density of what's getting put in there. And it's skimmable because the way you do the hierarchy of the headlines and the text, and you have it say what it needs to say. It can travel without a presenter. All your narrative is there. And you can highlight what's important on every single page. And here's a couple just examples of the way that you can make them look. So you might be thinking, oh my God, but my slides are so cinematic and beautiful and arresting and awesome. Well, there's a way you can solve that too and still go into your pitch with these really lovely slides. And this is an example from David Allen. He did the Getting Things Done program, some of you guys are familiar with. Very beautiful slides, very arresting. And yet he knew he needed to still do handouts as leave-behinds and send-ahead. So there's a little known feature in presentation software called the notes page. You could see here, this is what the notes page looked like for his deck. What happens is when you're typing your notes in the notes view, it's creating this notes page, but a lot of people don't realize it's there. And the notes master, if you were to hit the notes master, you could see it's got a pretty big slide, and a place there for notes that just flows it in. But what a lot of people don't know is that you can graphically design that notes master and make your notes look really pretty. So this is the example that we did for David Allen. You can see on the right, it looks very different than the default one that's in the presentation software. And so I want you to look right here. This is where his beautiful cinematic slide is going to appear that he presented. And then you can see you can put tons of stuff on the page. It's a whole second surface. So you could actually pass this out as a slide doc when your talk is done. So when an investor says, send me your deck, they're not wanting a copy of, cinematic. They're actually wanting a slide doc of sorts. They're going to, maybe if you did cinematic, they'll read your notes. But they really, really, really want to be able to skim through your idea and make a quick decision. So this is kind of how it works. You send your slide doc ahead of time as an emissary to open up the door. It's thoughtful, it's well constructed, can be beautiful and well designed. And then in the meeting, you have a kind of a combination between a presentation and appendix. When they start taking you on the loop-de-loo, you should probably have some sort of visual representation that answers all your questions. And then also, when they say, send me your deck, they're asking you for a leave behind that can transfer around through the organization without the help of a verbal presenter. So that's your little tip of the day for how to give a pitch. And I want to make it really clear is that the way you communicate is what's going to make your ideas a reality. The difference between a great idea that gets adopted and a great idea that gets rejected is based solely on how someone communicates. You cannot look at a movement that didn't start with an impassioned plea. And this is what you guys are creating, is an impassioned plea, trying to convince people to give you a ton of money, which is kind of exciting. But I want to just close with the fact that the Silicon Valley is this place that it historically used to be just this rich, fertile ground for fruit. My father-in-law used to come from the Imperial Valley and come and pick fruit here. And he used to describe for me what it was like to just walk down these rows of trees and the fruit was just juicy and hanging. Before it was called the Silicon Valley, when my father-in-law came and picked its fruit, it was called the Valley of the Heart's Delight. And we've changed its name to the Silicon Valley. And today, on my 30th anniversary being here, it's been a good place for me. It's been a great place for me. It's been like the land of milk and honey. I'm a high school graduate that showed up in the valley at 28 years old with my hand on my hip and enough street smarts to feel like I could tell people in the valley what should come out of their mouth. And it's been good to me. And so my hope for you is that this ecosystem that Vinod's trying to build for you will be like that for you. Your ideas will flourish and they'll grow and you'll learn to be a communicator. Because if you communicate brilliantly, your employees will feel like you're creating a great place where they belong. If you communicate brilliantly, you'll become a fantastic leader, not only in your own place, but in the world. If you communicate great, your teams will innovate in ways you never dreamed they could. And ultimately, if you communicate great, you'll be able to serve the underserved and build great products and things that will change people's lives. So I have 6 minutes to take questions. I'm definitely the presentation lady. You can ask me about anything, and I will answer it. So I would love to take some questions from you guys. Yeah.
Thank you for a great talk, by the way. So as the world's changing with the new velocity, bite-sized, real-time, agile, what's changed about your overall thesis?
Yeah, it's interesting. I think that the patience for a nice, beautiful, are people reading large bits of literature anymore? Can they sit through even an 18-minute TED Talk? So even TED went from 18 minutes to 9 to 6 to 3. They have different kinds of interstitials because now even an 18-minute talk that's bad is unbearable. So things are getting tighter. Things are getting tighter and shorter, and it takes a lot more time to do that. So right now we're trying to figure out how can you make presentations on the fly? How can you use AI to help you? How can you make the presentation process making? How do you mechanize this model and stuff like that, right? So you could do it quite a bit more rapid, not only on the creation, but then what's the tolerance level for either making it so immersive through VR and other stuff, or how do you make it just so tight that it's bearable? So we're seeing, we're not seeing it slow down on the corporate level, because so often CEOs have these moments like all hands and stuff. They have to prepare those well, and they have to communicate what's on the minds and hearts of the teams. So I'm not seeing those shorten. In fact, they're sometimes getting even a little longer so they can be more thorough. I don't think the power of the spoken word will ever go away. So I think we spend a lot of time looking at social clicks and ad clicks and all of that. By the time you get the right people in the room with your salesperson and you have eye contact and you can make a human connection, person to person, that's what all the millions in marketing and advertising are spent on, is getting the right two people in the room. And if you can create a human connection, it makes your brand so beautiful and winsome. So that'll never go away. It's just the patience for a nice formed talk is getting tighter is all. Yeah. Yeah.
Hi, Slava. Do you recommend to test your story, and what will be the right people to do that, and how would you do that?
How do you, I'm sorry, how do you test?
To test the story, like before doing any public speech, or even like for the company, do you recommend to do a test run, I don't know, like with your co-founder or with someone?
Are you talking about rehearsal specifically, or?
Like really see
absolutely.
what points get reaction, what points are not clear, and what is the right way.
Yeah, when it's really high stakes, you need to rehearse. The other thing that we encourage, one of the way you can get to some what is, what could be, is to query other people. Like, how would you resist this? What would be your reaction to this? And you bake that into your talk, because if you start to get the reaction and you know how people are going to resist, you can actually plant some of those ideas in your talk and say, I realize some of you may feel like this, but blah, blah, blah. And by addressing what they said, they'll be like, oh my God, he's so thoughtful. I was just thinking that, and he just addressed it. So I think making sure all of the resistance, all the reaction, have a small team of trusted people. I love what Kim said, someone who'll tell you straight up, like don't say it like that, or don't put so much emphasis on that, or you're making it sound like this. Was that your intent? So it's like a content/delivery coach will be able to help you shape it in a really great way, especially when it's really important. Hi.
Hi. Can you talk about the top 3 blunders that you see?
I did see Dub at WWDC, I think it was 1992. They've been with us for 30 years, which is really fun. Apple has. A guy peed on the stage, and he had khakis on. And another one was an ex-Apple exec who went to another place, and the team thought it'd be really cool if he would drive a Harley onto the stage. And so he drove it right on and right off into the front row. So, and then another female CEO tried to carabiner. So you see things like that. She tried to carabiner onto the stage, and that didn't go so well. But as far as, there's blunders where ideas should have gotten adopted, and didn't, and those don't make history.
In the context of those pitches, what are the tips? You said a lot of things to do. What are the things to avoid that's what I meant maybe.
Oh, in the pitch specifically? Yeah, you know what? I have queried, I am in touch with a lot of venture capitalists, and I tend to fixate more on what you want to hear than what doesn't happen. So in the actual pitch room, like where they failed, I don't have that many insights into that specifically, outside of them not getting the funding or a really great idea not getting adopted. I do think that VCs are smart enough that if the pitch itself, like if you're not a great communicator, usually they make the bet on the CEO. The idea can be great, but they'll give you permission to pivot, right? So a lot of times they're betting on the CEO. So I think you do have to have some level of confidence, even if you have a really, really good idea. So I don't know, Vinod can probably tell you more about why some of them have failed. Don't ride a motorcycle into your pitch meeting. That would be my advice. Yes?
So you mapped the verbal part to the signal, which I really appreciated. Have you mapped any of the nonverbal communication to either a signal analogy or something else? Because that seems to be a big part of the effectiveness.
We did there was another analysis that was verbal, in this case, on Dr. King. He had 3 specific verbal arches in his vocal variety, and he got louder and louder to the end. So when we plot that, it rose up 3 times. Right now, we're trying to figure out, because we have a whole practice where we coach you in how to deliver. And so we're trying to knit together some products that'll grab your facial recognition and your vocal variety and say, you look like this. You know, you've got resting bitch face half the time, or whatever it would say. Like, we want it to be able to map that. So there's a real need for that. I went all the way back to Elizabethan gestures. So we go like, we were taught to do that. We're not born to react in certain ways, and gestures mean some things in some countries and some things in other countries. And so I've studied it a lot, and we have a whole little practice on how to have stage presence, what it means to be dynamic, empathetic, and how it expresses itself physically. But I haven't analyzed thousands of talks like I did this one. But that needs to be done to be able to program it into the intelligence, and we're working on that. That's a good question. I think my time is up, and you'd be very excited about the next speaker, so I will bid you adieu. Thanks, you guys. Okay.